Chapter 1. The Scholar and the Lantern. The day had been long, but not hurried. It was the kind of day that seemed to stretch and fold over itself, so that morning sun felt like a distant memory, and the afternoon had faded without anyone noticing exactly when. By the time Marcus Varro closed the final scroll of the evening, the light beyond his study window had softened to the color of warm clay, and the air carried the faint, resin-sweet smell of cypress trees. Marcus was a man who loved the slow pace of things. A scholar by habit, though not by profession, he had long since retired from the bustle of Rome itself, preferring the gentler rhythm of the coastal towns. His small villa stood along the Via Aurelia, the ancient road that traced the land's edge like a quiet companion, leading travelers north and south, never rushing them to their destinations. On his desk sat an object unlike any of the clay lamps or bronze oil bowls he owned. It was a lantern, small enough to cradle in two hands, made not from metal, but from porcelain, so pale it was almost luminous even without a flame. Soft brushstrokes painted across its surface depicted cranes in mid-flight, their wings caught in a moment of endless glide. Between them, clouds drifted in delicate curls, so fine they seemed ready to dissolve if touched. The lantern had not been crafted in Rome, nor anywhere in the provinces. It had come to Marcus by way of a merchant from the far eastern reaches of the world, a man whose speech was sprinkled with words Marcus did not know. His clothing was of silk so light it stirred at the slightest breath. The merchant had spoken of lands where bamboo rose in green forests so tall they brushed the morning fog, and rivers wound through valleys like silver threads in exchange for a set of Roman glass vessels. The merchant had placed this lantern in Marcus's hands. "When you light it," he had said, speaking slowly so that Marcus could follow, "it will carry your thoughts where your feet cannot go, across seas, across mountains, even across time." Marcus had smiled politely at the time, unsure if the statement was meant as poetry or promise. It's something about the lantern, the cool smoothness of its porcelain, quiet dignity of its painted cranes, had stayed in his mind ever since. Tonight, with the last scroll stored and the evening breeze beginning to stir the olive branches outside, he thought it might be time to see whether the merchant's words held any truth. He rose from his desk and stepped into the peristyle, open-air courtyard at the villa's heart. The sky overhead was deepening toward violet, the first thin star just visible above the tiled roofline. The fountain in the center gave its gentle, unending murmur, a sound that never intruded, but was always there, like the steady breathing of the house itself. Marcus placed the lantern on the low edge of the fountain. For a while, he simply studied it in the fading light, letting his mind drift on the stillness around him. He thought of the cranes painted in flight. He thought of the merchant's words. He thought of all the roads he had never walked, all the rivers he had never crossed, all the skies that had never been above his head, and yet, perhaps, could be reached in some other way. Inside the kitchen, a small flame waited in the form of a brass oil lamp. Marcus lifted it carefully, shielding the fire from the breeze, and carried it to the courtyard. Kneeling by the fountain, he tilted the lamp toward the lantern's inner wick. The flame caught slowly, first as a small golden bead, then as a soft glow spreading across the porcelain walls. The cranes came alive at once. Their wings seemed to lengthen the clouds to drift. The painted sky around them glowed with a warmth that the brush alone could never have given. Marcus leaned back on his heels and watched. The courtyard grew quieter still, though he had not thought such a thing possible. The flame's light rested on the fountain's rippling surface, shifting gently as if stirred by some far-off wind. The air smelled faintly of olive wood smoke from a neighbor's hearth, mingled with the cooler scent of damp stone. Somewhere beyond the villa wall, a donkey's hoof knocked softly against cobblestone, followed by the murmured voice of its handler. Marcus sat there a long while, the lantern between him and the fountain's voice, his eyes half closed, not from sleepiness, but from the simple ease of watching a thing that did not demand to be watched. It occurred to him that perhaps this was the real magic of the lantern, not that it carried thoughts across the world, but that it gathered them into stillness, so that one might notice the quiet paths of the present moment. The light remained steady, as though promising it would not falter until the watcher himself was ready to rest. Chapter 2. The Courtyard of Quiet Water. The courtyard had been part of the villa for as long as Marcus could remember, though he had not always lived here. It was not grand by Roman standards. No marble colonnades, no mosaic floors, showing scenes of gods and heroes, but it had something more valuable to him, a sense of contentment, as if the place itself breathed in a measured, steady way. At its center, the fountain whispered without end. It was built of pale stone, worn smooth by years of flowing water, the basin round and shallow, no more than an arm's length across. Beneath the surface, the water took on the color of the sky above it. In the morning, it held the pale brightness of dawn. In the afternoon, the warmth of sunlit gold. And at night, the muted glow of whatever light touched it. Tonight, that light came from the porcelain lantern. Its glow rippled on the water in slow, shifting shapes, sometimes like drifting clouds, sometimes like the curved edges of the painted crane's wings. The courtyard's fig tree stood at one corner, its trunk slightly twisted from years of reaching toward the sun. Its broad leaves moved only when the gentlest breeze passed through, and now they seemed almost still enough to have been carved from jade. A few ripe figs hung low, their skin soft and dark. Marcus knew that one might drop at any moment into the fountain. They sometimes did, sending out rings that traveled patiently to the basin's edge. Around the edges of the courtyard, terracotta pots held herbs, rosemary with its fine, silver-green leaves, thyme, whose scent was sharp when crushed, but faint when left alone, and basil, which needed the warmth of the day and so now folded itself in upon the cooler night. The air was not heavy with fragrance, but carried a faint mingling of these plants' essences, so subtle that one might notice them only when breathing, deeply and without hurry. The walls that enclosed the courtyard were whitewashed, their surface uneven from years of sun and rain. In daylight, they reflected the sun, but now they seemed to hold the softness of the lantern's light, gathering it instead of sending it away. Above those walls, Marcus could see the silhouettes of the olive trees beyond, their shapes dark against the slow deepening sky. As the night settled more firmly over the villa, least sounds of the outside world faded to only the most distant murmurs. Somewhere far along the Via Aurelia, a cartwheel turned lazily over stones. A dog barked once, then decided it was not worth the effort to continue. In the hills, crickets began their measured chorus, their voices steady and without urgency. Marcus sat on the stone bench near the fountain, feeling the coolness of the seat beneath him. The lantern remained where he had placed it, its painted cranes still mid-flight, their wings casting faint shadows inside the porcelain walls. The glow made the courtyard feel like a space apart from the rest of the world, not hidden exactly, but gently set aside, as if time itself had chosen to walk more slowly here. He leaned back, listening not just to the fountain's voice, but to the way the sound seemed to fill the spaces between thoughts. It was the same kind of silence he remembered from temples he had visited in his youth, where incense rose in thin spirals, and the air seemed made of patience. Perhaps this was why the merchant had spoken of the lantern as something that could carry the mind elsewhere. With the right stillness, the mind could travel without moving at all for a long while. Marcus did not move, save to adjust his hands in his lap. He felt no need to speak. Even his thoughts became less about words and more about images. A crane's feather drifting down, a cup of tea steaming in morning light, a small boat gliding over a glassy river. He let these pass through him as gently as the fountain's water, without trying to hold them. The evening deepened. The stars above multiplied, faint at first, then steadier. The lantern's flame continued to burn without flicker, the oil within. It's still plentiful. In this moment, there was nothing that needed to be done, and nowhere that needed to be reached. The courtyard was enough. The water was enough. Care, the light, was enough. Chapter 3. The merchant's tale. It had been more than a season since Marcus first met the merchant who carried the porcelain lantern, but the memory remained as clear as the day itself. It was a morning of pale light, the sort of light that makes even the ear seem untroubled. Marcus had gone to the port at Ostia to collect a shipment of parchment from Alexandria. The docks were their usual blend of quiet commotion, sailors moving with unspoken rhythms, ropes pulled and coiled, the slow thud of amphorae being unloaded from the bellies of ships. The scent of salt hung in the air, mingled with tar, olive, oil, and spices, so faintly sweet they seemed almost like a memory of summer. That was when he saw the merchant's ship. It was smaller than the broad Roman cargo vessels, its hull painted in faded reds and greens, the bow carved in the shape of a bird whose wings curved inward. The sail was furled, but even when still, it looked as if it belonged to the wind. The merchant himself stood near the gangplank, speaking in a careful Latin, touched with a lilt Marcus could not place. His robe was of silk, the color of deep river water, and it moved like water as he turned to greet each passerby. His hands were never still, gesturing in quiet arcs as he spoke, as if tracing invisible calligraphy in the air. Marcus had approached with the casual interest of someone who simply wished to look closer at foreign goods. But the merchant's eyes had met his with a kind of warmth that was both greeting and invitation. Without a word, he had reached into a lacquered chest and drawn out the lantern. The porcelain had been cool even under the morning sun, and its weight was lighter than Marcus expected. He had traced a finger over one of the painted cranes, its wingtip so fine that it seemed more like ink on silk than glaze on clay. The merchant had explained slowly, still turning each word over before offering it, that the lantern came from a city at the edge of the sea, where the tide pulled in as gently as it left. There, he said, the nights were long but never lonely, for the air was full of the scent of tea, of the sound of wind through bamboo, and of the sight of paper lanterns swaying along narrow streets. He had told Marcus that in that city, people believed light had a way of remembering the places it had touched. A flame lit in the evening would carry the shape and color of that moment, and if the lantern's owner sat in stillness, the light would reveal the memory, not with pictures or voices, but with a feeling, so that the heart itself recognized the place it had never stood in. Marcus had listened without speaking, his gaze resting on the cranes that circled the lantern's porcelain sky. When the merchant offered to trade for the Roman glass vessels Marcus had brought to sell, there was no bargaining, no calculation. The exchange happened with a quiet nod. Before partying, the merchant had given a final piece of advice, more like a whisper than a statement. Light it when the world feels slow enough to listen. If the air is too hurried, it will carry nothing. Though he had not lit the lantern until now. Chapter 4. Preparing the lantern. Marcus had lit the lantern once already this evening, yet something about the act called to him again, not from impatience or urgency, but from the quiet pull of ritual. Some tasks, he thought, are not simply done and finished. They are returned to like a favorite path one walks again just to feel the way it winds beneath the feet. He decided to prepare it as the merchant might have done, giving the process his full attention. The courtyard, with its fountain and fig tree, felt like the right place for such care. The night was still warm, but touched with the gentlest coolness, like the breath of water just before dawn. First, he brought the lantern close and examined it in the steady light. The porcelain was without crack or chip, the glaze holding a faint sheen as if it remembered the hands that had shaped it. The cranes, frozen mid-flight, seemed to lean into the curve of the lantern's body, their wings always finding the same point in the air. Between them, the painted clouds drifted in soft spirals, patterns without beginning or end. Marcus set the lantern down on the edge of the fountain and removed the small lid. Inside was the wick, coiled neatly, waiting for flame. He poured in a measure of clear oil, moving slowly so as not to spill a drop. The liquid caught the lantern's inner glow even before it was lit, reflecting a pale shimmer back at him. He thought about the merchant's words, "Light it when the world feels slow enough to listen." The world did feel slow enough now. The fountain's voice had softened with the deepening night, its rhythm steady as breathing. The fig leaves swayed once, then rested again, as though they too were listening. Marcus lifted the brass lamp from the bench beside him. The flame was small, a calm bead of gold balanced on its wick. He shielded it with one hand as he leaned toward the lantern, the movement unhurried, almost ceremonial. When the flame touched the new wick, it caught with a soft sound, not a crackle, but a quiet bloom of light. The porcelain walls glowed at once. The cranes brightened, their wings outlined in a warm gold that made them seem to move in slow, graceful arcs. The painted clouds took on a faint blush, as though lit from within. Marcus replaced the lid and stepped back, letting the lantern rest. He did not sit right away. Instead, he walked once around the courtyard, the lantern at its center, as if making a slow circuit of a shrine. His steps were light against the stone, and with each turn he saw the lantern from a slightly different angle. Sometimes the crane's wings seemed to lead, sometimes to follow. Sometimes the clouds looked like waves. Sometimes they seemed like folds of silk drifting in a wind no one could feel. When he finally sat, he noticed how the light from the lantern touched the fountain surface. It broke into ripples that moved outward, faded, and began again, never in a hurry to reach the basin's edge. The pattern repeated itself endlessly, the same, and yet never exactly the same, a reminder that slowness was not stillness, and that movement did not require haste. He let his gaze soften. The longer he watched, the less it felt like he was observing the lantern, and more as though he was simply sharing space with it. It glowed, the fountain murmured. The air carried the faint sense of rosemary and fig. Each was doing what it was meant to do, without thought, without striving, in that quiet. Marcus felt a sense of ease that was not unlike the comfort of returning home after a long journey, though, in truth, he had gone nowhere at all. Chapter 5. The journey of Light the Lantern's glow was steady now, a small sun in the courtyard's center. Marcus watched it for a long time before he noticed that his eyes had half closed, not from tiredness, but from the way the light seemed to soften everything it touched. It was not the sharp brightness of a torch or the bold gleam of polished bronze. This was gentler, a light that did not chase away shadows, but rested among them, as if it understood their place. He thought of the merchant's words, "It will carry your thoughts where your feet cannot go." So he let his thoughts follow the glow. In his mind, it rose from the fountain's edge, lifting as easily as mist in morning air. It passed over the fig tree, its leaves catching the light for a moment before letting it go. Then it drifted over, the villa wall brushing against the olive branches, touching the uneven stones of the Via Aurelia before continuing on. Beyond the road lay the field's orderly rows of vines, their leaves dark in the night, the soil beneath them breathing quietly. The lantern's glow slid across them like a slow tide, glinting on the curve of a terracotta jug left by a farmer's doorway, settling for a moment in the hollow of a worn amphora before moving on. Soon it reached the sea. The waters were calm, holding the pale shimmer of stars. The glow rested on the surface, and the waves accepted it, carrying it further out with each gentle pull. Ships slept at anchor, their masts drawing thin lines against the night sky. The lantern's light touched their hulls in passing, as if greeting them without words. Out beyond the last ship, the light began its long crossing. Days and nights passed without measure here, only the steady rhythm of water beneath and sky above. Sometimes the glow floated low, close enough for curious fish to catch its warmth. Other times it rose high, drifting just under the stars. It reached distant shores where the sand was pale and fine, and pine trees leaned toward the water as if listening for news from across the waves. The air there carried a scent Marcus had never known, fresh and sharp, with a sweetness beneath it, like flowers blooming on a cool morning. The light followed a narrow river inland. On one bank, a garden spread in quiet perfection. Stones, set in deliberate patterns, moss soft as velvet, a bridge of red lacquer arching over the water. Paper lanterns hung from the eaves of a tea house, their shapes swaying gently, their glow reflecting in the still pond below. The sound of water here was different from its fountain, a softer trickle, like whispered conversation in his mind. Marcus saw figures moving through the garden, not hurried, not slow, but simply as they wished to move. Their robes rustled faintly, and now and then a sleeve caught the glow, holding it for a heartbeat before letting it pass. Somewhere, a bell chimed, not loud, not urgent, just a note that faded as naturally as it began. The lantern's light drifted beyond the garden, up into the hills where bamboo rose tall and close together. The stalks swayed in the night breeze, tapping gently against one another in a rhythm that seemed older than speech. Between them, the ground was cool and shadowed, the air carrying the scent of rain that had passed hours before. From there, the glow followed a mountain path. It wound between stones shaped by centuries, past small shrines where incense coiled upward in threads too thin to catch. The path led higher until the air grew thin and crisp. From the summit, the view stretched far, rivers curling like silver ribbons, villages with rooftops that gleamed faintly, valleys holding their own pockets of mist. And yet, the light did not stay. Slowly, it turned back toward the sea, retracing its path as if unwilling to wander too far from its beginning. It crossed the waters again, found the coast where the olive trees met the shore, followed the road, past sleeping villas, and settled once more in the courtyard. Marcus opened his eyes fully, though he had not realized they were nearly closed. The lantern was exactly where it had been all along, the fountain still murmuring beside it. Yet he felt as if he had been far away and returned, carrying the quiet of those distant gardens and bamboo groves with him. The light had not gone anywhere, yet it had gone everywhere. Chapter 6, The Garden of Twin Moons. Lantern's glow lingered in Marcus's thoughts long after the imagined journey had faded. It was as if the light had left behind a faint echo, not in sound, but in feeling, a quiet invitation to see the world differently. He leaned back on the stone bench, letting his gaze soften until the courtyard began to shift in his mind. The fountain was still there, murmuring gently, but now its edges seemed less like carved Roman stone and more like smooth river rock, the kind he imagined in eastern gardens. Moss, soft and deep green, spread around its base, holding droplets of water that glimmered in the lantern's glow. The fig tree stretched its branches as always, yet its leaves now seemed to mingle with bamboo stalks, tall and slender, its pale green sheaths catching the light in soft bands. The olive trees beyond the courtyard wall bowed slightly inward, their silvery leaves blending with the darker greens of pine needles. it was no longer clear where Rome ended and the Far East began. The two had folded into one another like colors in a slowly stirred pool. The tiled roof above the peristyle took on a faint curve, as though echoing the shape of a pagoda. Between its supporting columns, paper lanterns swayed in the same breeze that touched the rosemary pots. Their soft light mingled with the glow from the porcelain crane lantern, so that shadows overlapped in quiet patterns across the floor. In the center of this blended garden, 2 moons hung in the sky. One was the pale, steady moon of Italy, familiar and constant. The other was softer, almost pearlescent, casting a light that seemed to come from within itself. The 2 moons did not compete. They shared the night, their circles slightly apart but balanced. As though each knew its place in the sky, the air was warm, touched with coolness from the fountain spray. It carried the scent of both rosemary and plum blossoms, of fig leaves and bamboo after rain. Somewhere, just beyond hearing, there was the faintest suggestion of music not played, but existing as part of the air itself. The way certain breezes can feel like a song without a note being struck. Marcus found himself walking through this garden, though he could not say if his feet touched stone or moss. He passed a low wall carved with patterns he half recognized from Roman friezes, yet they curved into shapes like curling clouds and waves. A narrow bridge arched over a pond where koi swam lazily alongside the shadow of an ancient Roman coin lying on the pond's bed, its edges worn smooth. On the far side of the bridge stood a stone bench much like his own, and on it rested another porcelain lantern, not painted with cranes, but with olive branches and laurel leaves. Its glow was the same gentle gold, and for a moment he wondered if it was watching him, just as his lantern at home watched over its courtyard. The moons shifted slightly above, their light falling in long, drowsy beams across the garden. The fountain, or perhaps it was a small waterfall now, continued its patient voice. Never hurried, never still. Marcus breathed in the mingled scents again, the rosemary of his home, the blossoms of faraway orchards, the faint spice of pine. All of them settled into him as if they had always been there, as if this blended garden was not imagined at all, but remembered from somewhere beyond the reach of his own travels. He sat on the stone bench beneath the twin moons and let the scene hold him. He felt no need to decide where he was, or even when. It was enough to be here, in this space that belonged to both worlds and to neither. A place lit by 2 moons and the steady flame of a lantern that had crossed both seas and dreams. Chapter 8. The Village Beyond the Benda. Bend came quietly. The mist parted just enough for Marcus to see the faint outline of rooftops, their silhouettes softened by the night. Some roofs were flat and tiled in the Roman fashion, catching the pale glow of moonlight like sheets of silver. Others curved upward at the corners, lifting into the air as though bowing to the sky. The boat drifted toward a small wooden jetty, where a single rope was tied loosely to a post carved in the shape of a lotus flower. Marcus stepped out without haste, feeling the smooth, worn planks beneath his sandals. The air here carried the mingled scents of river reeds and warm spices. Faint as a memory, a narrow street began at the jetty, paved with uneven stones that had been smoothed by centuries of footsteps. On one side stood a row of buildings with columns, their capitals carved with both acanthus leaves and stylized clouds. On the other, houses with painted wooden shutters opened onto small gardens, where bamboo rustled gently beside olive trees. Few lanterns hung outside doorways, their light filtered through paper or thin sheets of marble. Each glow was soft, as if the village had agreed long ago that the night should remain gentle. An elderly man sat at the threshold of a shop, weaving small baskets from reeds. His hands moved slowly, unhurried by the passing of time. Beside him, a pot of tea rested on a low table steam curling upward in shapes that dissolved before they reached the cool air. He looked up at Marcus and nodded, not in greeting alone, but in recognition, as though Marcus had been expected further along. A stone fountain trickled into a shallow basin. The statue at its center was neither fully Roman nor entirely Eastern, a robed figure holding a scroll in one hand and a lotus in the other. Water slipped over the folds of the stone robe in thin streams, each one catching the lantern light before falling into the pool below. A pair of children wandered past, each carrying a paper lantern painted with cranes. They did not speak, but their quiet laughter was like a ripple through still water, gentle and gone almost before it was heard. Marcus walked slowly, taking in the rhythm of the place, the creak of wooden shutters, the soft clink of ceramic cups, the murmur of voices, too low to make out. Nothing here demanded his attention, yet everything seemed to invite it, offering itself in fragments, the warm scent of bread cooling on a windowsill, the faint perfume of jasmine somewhere behind a garden wall, the rustle of silk from an unseen doorway that at the far end of the street he came upon a small square. In its center stood a single tall lantern, made from a frame of bronze and panels of pale stones so thin they glowed like amber when lit. The light within was steady, its flame almost still in the calm night air. Marcus paused there, feeling as though the entire village was quietly breathing with him, the slow inhale of the river beyond, the gentle exhale of the wind moving between rooftops. In this place, time felt like water in a deep pool, untroubled, clear, and endless. Chapter 9, Night of Still Stars. When Marcus lifted his gaze from the lantern in the square, he saw the mist had thinned enough for the sky to appear, not as a sudden clearing, but as though the night had slowly, gently unrolled above him. The stars were steady, no twinkling, no restless shimmer, only the deep, unwavering glow of light that had traveled across centuries to arrive in this quiet village to the west. Familiar constellations from his youth in Rome marked their positions. The hunter, with his bow drawn but never loosed. The dolphin arcing as if forever about to leap. Yet, between and beyond them, other patterns took shape, patterns he had never seen until this journey. A great dragon wound its way across the darkness, each star a silent scale upon its endless body. Above it, a cluster of lights formed the shape of a celestial crane, wings outstretched as though crossing from one horizon to the other. The two sets of stories, Roman and Eastern, met here, without conflict, their lines overlapping like threads in a single weaving dot. The village square had fallen even quieter. The children with the crane lanterns had gone indoors, their soft lights now glowing faintly through paper windows. Somewhere, a door slid shut with a sound like silk folding. Marcus found a bench of worn stone at the edge of the square and sat down, leaning back until his shoulders touched the wall behind him. From here, the stars seemed to rest just above the rooftops, as if they too had paused their journey for the night. He thought of the merchant's voice telling stories in the courtyard. He thought of the slow river, bending toward this place as though guided by some invisible hand. Every part of his journey felt as though it had been stitched together in a pattern, like the constellations themselves, impossible to see when standing too close, but clear and whole when viewed from stillness. A faint breeze passed over the square, barely enough to stir the flame inside the great bronze lantern. The light wavered once, then returned to its steady glow, casting long shadows that did not disturb the peace above. The dragon and the crane seemed almost to move, not in haste, but in the slow, eternal motion of the heavens. Their flight would not end tonight, or tomorrow, or even in 1,000 years. Marcus let his gaze soften, no longer following individual stars, but letting them blur into a soft, endless field of light. It was like looking into a pool so deep that the bottom could never be reached, yet feeling no fear, only the quiet certainty that it was meant to be this way. In that stillness, the weight of the day began to loosen. The air itself seemed to grow warmer, and the sounds of the village faded to the far edges of awareness, like a lullaby half heard through a dream. Asterisk, Chapter 10. The lantern sleeps. Square had become a cradle of silence. Even the faintest sounds, a cartwheel settling, a shutter easing into place, seemed to belong to the rhythm of the night, not to disturb it. The great bronze lantern in the center glowed faintly now, its flame having burned through most of the oil. Its light no longer reached far across the cobblestones, but gathered close to itself, as if drawing a blanket around its shoulders. Marcus remained on the stone bench, his eyes half closed. The air was cool, but not sharp, the kind of coolness that softened the edges of thought and slowed the turning of the mind. Somewhere beyond the village, the river made its way to the sea, but its sound was so gentle it could have been the breath of the earth itself. A few last villagers passed through the square, moving slowly, speaking in low tones, their shapes blurred in the dimness like brushstrokes in a painting that had been set out to fade in the moonlight. Each carried their own small light, a candle, a paper lantern, and each light made a quiet promise to return again tomorrow. The stars above remained patient and still, as they had been since the first fire was lit on the first night of the first village. Marcus felt himself becoming part of that stillness, his thoughts no longer moving forward, but simply resting, like leaves floating on a calm pond. At last, the lantern in the square gave a final, delicate flicker. The flame bent low, as though bowing, and then vanished into the soft darkness. The bronze frame kept its shape, but the light within had gone to sleep, leaving only the memory of its warmth in the cool air. Marcus closed his eyes. The darkness was not empty, but full of the quiet breath of the village, the distant hum of the river, the steady weight of the stars. Somewhere far away in Rome, in the east, perhaps in both at once, another lantern was being lit. But here, in this moment, the night belonged to rest, and so the village slept.